Okay, Clerk Moss, do we have all the appropriate razzmatazz recordings going?
1 second, Madam Chair, and we are good to go.
Okay, well, welcome back to the work session of the Washington County Board of Commissioners, the afternoon of Tuesday, September 14th, 2021. We have one more remaining item on our work session agenda, and that's a status report on our work to comply with House Bill 2001 for middle housing implementation. I just want to note that I have another meeting that I need to be at around 3 o'clock. I think it's okay if I'm a few minutes late, but if it gets too far after that, I'll need Vice Chair Treese to take the gavel. Thank you, Commissioner Treese. So with that, we'll turn it over to you, Mr. Roberts, and your more than able team of experts.
Yes, we do have a really good team here. So I'm actually going to turn things over to Teresa Cherniak and Ann Kelly are going to walk us through the presentation. And then our Planning and Development Services Manager, Andy Back, is here along with me, and we'll be happy to answer any questions or participate in the discussion at the end. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. I'm Teresa Cherniak, Principal Community Planner in Long Range Planning with LUT. As you both noted, we're here today to present a status report on our work on House Bill 2001 implementation, the Middle Housing Bill, in advance of future briefings that we'll have and eventual hearings on several, if not several ordinances next year. Next slide, please. We did, I think, budget 60 minutes. I don't know that we need that whole time, so hopefully we can be done, Chair, before you need to leave at 3. Our presentation should be around 20 minutes, so there should be plenty of time for discussion. So this is what we'll go over. We'll first start with some context about where this middle housing fits with other housing work that the county does. We'll provide a very quick refresher of what the bill and rules require and the guiding principles that the board approved back in February. We'll talk about our current work and the briefings that we have planned with our Planning Commission, as well as some of the key options and policy choices that we'll be talking with them about and eventually with the board about. We'll talk about our community engagement so far and what we have planned. We're excited about what we have planned for the fall. And we'll talk about the results of our online open house and survey, and then engage with the board on next steps and what you would like to know more about or what you have questions on. Next slide, please. So first, where does HB 2001 fit within the context of all of the housing work that the county does? I think when we're focusing so much on HB 2001 and middle housing, and we want to make sure that everyone understands that this is one part of a very, very large picture of what the county does with housing. And different departments, what different departments do. And I know every meeting you are talking about different elements of this. So Housing Services does administer the Metro Housing Bond. They coordinate programs and services for houselessness. They are the Housing Authority or their board. Community Development does a lot of work administering grants from the federal government to try to get people into housing, to rehabilitate the housing that they have. They do the consolidated plan. And then LUT's part is really about preparing and implementing the comprehensive plan, which does include goals for housing affordability, housing choice and availability, housing condition, and then we implement through our community plans and the community development code. So you can see from this graphic that HB 2001 implementation is a part of what we all do, and it's an important part, but it is only a part. And there's a lot of work being done by a lot of people. Next slide, please. So the intent again of House Bill 2001 was to help increase housing supply and housing choice by reducing barriers to housing types that can be smaller and or less costly than new detached houses. And I didn't put on this slide, but those housing types, just as a reminder, are duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters. So those are all the different types of housing that are addressed under HB 2001. Next slide, please. So this was adopted in 2019, and then rules were adopted in 2020. And those rules require every jurisdiction that's subject to this, and it's almost all of the jurisdictions within Metro, will need to allow a duplex on any residential lot where a single detached home is allowed. For the other types, the duplex, multiplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters, we must allow them in residential areas that allow detached homes, but there is some parameters that we can use to limit in some areas the other types other than duplexes. We need to use the same review process as detached housing in the same district. For the dimensional requirements, which are lot width, setback, and heights, those can't be more restrictive than what we currently have for detached housing. And then as far as parking, we are limited to a maximum of 1 off-street space per unit as what we can require. Next slide. So back in February, when we started work on this and came to the board, we had a set of 10 guiding principles to help staff and the Planning Commission navigate the work. So the board did approve these, and we wanted to just go over them again as a reminder, but also to make sure that these are still the guiding principles you want us to be using going forward. So I won't go through all of them in detail, but working in good faith to implement the new law and rules, equitable opportunities for middle housing in all areas where the bill and rules apply. An important one is to use the county's equity resolution and consider how this work can advance the county's commitment to dismantling policies and practices that have historically created obstacles. We also we're looking at balancing the need for housing with the other statewide planning goals, such as our natural resource goals, considering the impacts on affordability of housing when we develop the regulations. Next slide, please. Infrastructure is often a concern, so ensuring middle housing has and provides the appropriate infrastructure. Implementing a comprehensive community involvement program, making sure it's equitable and inclusive. And I'll talk quite a bit more about what we have in the works and planned for that. Working cooperatively with Metro and other local jurisdictions on outreach and development of regulations. Developing county-specific regulations that fit within our development code, borrowing from the model code as needed. And then the goal is to adopt county-specific regulations by the deadline of June 30th. Next slide, please. You've seen this before too. This is our process timeline. Earlier, we were here with the board talking about the economic analysis and market feasibility study. That work is being folded into our code concepts and policy considerations. So we are right here where the asterisk is, going from the code concepts and policy considerations into code writing. We've actually been doing both of them kind of at the same time, and they're feeding each other, but we're more seriously now into the code writing phase. But the next line there is the public process. There is definitely public process to go through to work with here as far as our outreach. And then the bottom line is briefings with the Planning Commission and the board. So all of that enters into our work as we go along. Next slide, please. Our current work, we did complete the feasibility study back in July. We have been analyzing our current development code against the rules and the model code, analyzing where in the rules there is some discretion, and preparing for discussions with the Planning Commission and the board about those spots. We have been coordinating quite regularly with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, with cities both within Washington County and within the metro region on different topics related to implementation, and kind of sharing what we're each learning about that, and kind of helping each other along through it. We have been talking with community participation organizations, CPOs, as they've asked us to come out. So Anne will actually be at CPO 1 tonight, and I believe CPO 6 was a couple of weeks ago. So and earlier on we went to the CCI and other CPOs. So we're trying to get out to those groups. We have talked with some developer representatives, and pretty much anyone who sends us an email or calls us or asks about it will engage and talk about this. We are undertaking engagement, which I'll talk about in a minute, and developing our equitable outreach program. And then we do have these briefings with the board and a set of briefings coming up with the Planning Commission. Next slide, please. So at the Planning Commission, based on the complexity of the bill and the rules and the likely complexity of the upcoming changes to our code, our plan is to lay a lot of groundwork with the Planning Commission in advance of hearings. And the idea is to provide education about the bill, the rules, the model code, as well as our current code, and where there are options. So we have 7 work session briefings at this point planned with the Planning Commission through December 1st. And that'll be an opportunity for them to discuss all of this, and provide any input that they would like to in advance of our moving forward. Next slide, please. And this is a list of the main areas where there are options and policy considerations. So part of what we'll focus on with the Planning Commission are these things. So there are choices and the paths to compliance. We can follow the rules, the rule-based approach, which would be essentially what the board has given us guidance in working through locally drafted standards to comply with the rules. There is a model code provided by the state, and there is actually a lot of good standards and rules in the model code as well, drawings that we may pull from. So there are some choices to be made there on how much of that we might use and pull into our code. The rules do allow us to establish minimum lot square footage for other than duplexes. So duplexes we can't limit. They'll be required to be allowed everywhere that we allow a single dwelling. But for the non-duplexes, we can establish minimum lot sizes. The rules do allow us to limit non-duplex middle housing in areas that are protected through statewide planning goals. So for instance, significant natural resource areas or floodplain areas we could limit non-duplex middle housing in those areas. And then it does allow us for master planned communities, and the county only has one, and that is North Bethany, that we could allow some limits to middle housing until each area is built out. Once it's built out, then it would be subject to middle housing. There are some options as far as street frontage improvement requirements, and those improvements include roadways, the right-of-way dedication, sidewalks. So we are exploring that further with the state and with other jurisdictions as to how they do that, because infrastructure is a topic that a lot of people are concerned with, and I know the board has talked about this in the past too. So we're looking at that and what our options are. Next slide, please. The rules do allow us to prescribe some design requirements. Currently, we do have some requirements in our districts, and we can apply those as well as those detailed in the model code. We need to apply the same things to the single detached homes as to the middle housing. So that may be a topic that gets explored. This is an interesting one, that the rules do allow us to define duplex, triplex, and quadplex as attached as well as detached. And so right now, we all of these are defined as being attached. So there's a common wall in between them. A duplex, there would be one common wall in between the two units. Triplex, each unit would have a common wall, etc. The rules do allow us to consider those detached, and that's an interesting planning idea that's a lot of jurisdictions are actually looking into and considering, and there are implications to that we're exploring, and we'll be bringing that forward as well. Cottage clusters, there are a lot of very detailed requirements there. The model code, this is one place where it really fully fleshes it out, and a lot of jurisdictions are looking at just taking the model code and using that and slightly massaging to fit into their own codes, and that is something that we're considering there as well. And then working in affordability opportunities as we can into the code regulations that we're developing. Next slide, please. So I'm going to suggest maybe stopping here for a bit of a board discussion. The next part of the presentation is about the community engagement and what we heard in the outreach. So we are interested in what the board would like as far as board briefings. At this point, they're scheduled for every 2 months for education, for policy discussions prior to the hearings. The next briefing actually I thought was in November, but it looks like there actually is going to be in December. There were a couple of meetings that were not going to happen in November, so that's now in December. So wondering if this is the right frequency every couple months. And then the content that we might bring to you. So we can do this sort of status reports. We can do briefings on key topics. We can let you know what the Planning Commission is kind of sorting out. And then we can do that either through written reports, through this kind of verbal presentation. So I'm happy to stop there. And if there are questions about anything that I've talked about so far or on these things, can open it up.
Commissioners, does anyone want to dive in first? Nope, so I will. This is work that we need to do, and it's important that we do it and that we follow up. I'm trying to flip back to your earliest slides. If I look at the guiding principles back, we want to get this work done in good faith, right? And make sure that we have equitable opportunities for the middle housing solutions throughout the unincorporated areas that we're responsible for. And we're talking about just the urban unincorporated areas, to be more precise. I think by virtue of our allowing these middle housing choices, we will be addressing the extent of the third guiding principle around dismantling policies and practices that create obstacles. But what I'm really trying to get at is And then there was the second page as well. That all holds. The fact that the legislation goes further, and I'll give you a case in point where you talk about townhouses, duplex, quads being both attached and detached. You know, I remind myself, we're the county, we're not the city. We do not have the level of city planning to do this work that other jurisdictions do. And I mean, not only this current code, but following through for all of the aspects that go into having a having these thriving neighborhoods over the course of time. And so as such, I'm reminded of a phrase that I heard Commissioner Rogers use back in 2019, Commissioner Rogers used back in 2019, and that was, if it isn't easy, let's not do it. And so what I'm really looking for is that, that we get this work done. And I appreciate that the Planning Commission will be really diving into the details, and I'll be leaning on them to do that. But I want to make sure that the construction industry can build these products, that we can be efficient in building these products, that we definitely have the base level of community infrastructure, like sidewalks, right? Like enough area on the streets so that we don't end up with a situation where every curb cut is for a driveway with no parking and no place for anybody to put their garbage cans that one day a week, when you've got 3 cans you have to put out, right? Or 4, there you go. So, I think the garbage receptacles, the sidewalks are 2 very practical things that we need to make sure can be handled. And then there's probably other flexibility and whatnot that will just chew up a lot of cycles, both from your having to look at how to write the code, how to identify their pros and cons of it, and for the Planning Commission to go through. So I'm really just, it all boils down to try to keep it simple and get the work done. Oh, and I also wanted to mention that in the Home Building Association magazine, on page 18, an article on faster permits bill is a start. Local implementation discussions highlight a need for more. Washington County, you guys in your department, Stephen, and the city of Bend were given quite the kudos on page 18. I'll scan it in and send it. So keep up the good work. Okay, other commissioners, comments, or are you ready to move on? Commissioner Teresa's cat's ready to move on. All righty, let's keep going.
Great. Okay, thanks. Thank you for those comments. They were great. So as far as community engagement, a lot of what we have done so far has been about education and getting the word out about what the bill was about and what it requires, and some common understandings of the different housing types and that sort of thing. So we do have our middle housing website up and running. We did an online open house and a survey, and I'll talk about the survey results in a second. We have done focused discussions with the LCD, other jurisdictions, CPOs, home builders, and others, and we'll plan to keep doing that. And then we did just send out a notice of intent to award, I believe it's what it's called, on a contract with a community engagement consultant that it's espousal which is a consortium that includes John L. Bell and Centro Cultural, Kirsten Pennington, Amber Ontiveros, and Point North. And so we're excited by that group and by the proposal that they gave to help us develop an equity-focused community engagement framework, not only for this work, but I think for, I know for the Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program, or MISTIP outreach, as well as then other outreach that we do. So we know that we don't yet really know how to effectively really do multicultural engagement and equity-focused engagement. And so this framework, we're hoping will serve us into the future to conduct culturally relevant engagement and be able to incorporate what we hear into the process. This is partially funded by the $150,000 grant that we did receive from the Department of Land Conservation and Development. So we feel really good about that, and that's quite a good amount of funding to be able to get this work going. Next slide, please. And the online open house results, we will be folding this into the work that the consultants do. So they'll help us sort through what we can take from this, and also what more we need to know and be asking people. But just going through this, we did this, let's see, July 16th through August 13th. So it was 1 month. We did have 170 people participate, including 3 that participated on our Spanish language version. Although a lot more people did identify as being Spanish speaking. So we did have a good representation of folks answering. The first couple questions were trying to get people to think about how they or someone they care about could benefit from middle housing or neighborhoods with more housing variety. And you can see from this that the vast majority of people strongly agreed that they or someone they knew could benefit from middle housing. Next slide, please. Then we asked if they had concerns about middle housing, and this was about evenly divided, almost 50-50 on yes and no. Some concerns were identified by people who actually said they supported middle housing, but they still maybe had some concerns with how it might be implemented. By far, the concerns, the main concerns were about infrastructure and concerns that it might be insufficient with additional people. And that include road improvements, transit, school capacity. So infrastructure in the bigger sense of infrastructure. And then parking was the second most cited. Next slide, please. And then the question, do you think middle housing may be beneficial? 85% of the people responding thought that it would be. And they recognize that it could provide more affordable housing, more variety and diversity, could offer some more home ownership options. But again, there were people who didn't think it would be, primarily because of concerns with neighborhood livability. And part of that was about development generally, probably, and removing mature tree canopy, increasing population density that could cause more conflicts, bigger development. There were concerns about that. But overall, 85% of the folks thought that it could be beneficial. Next slide, please. And we'll be doing a report out that'll be on our website, and we'll do a constant contact so that people, we're developing a list, a communication list, constant contact that will send out information to keep people involved. Then finally, adoption process and timing. Our plan is to file the ordinance by the end of December / early January. The Planning Commission hearings will start in February, and we're expecting 3 of those hearings, February and March. And then we'll get to the board in April and May. And given the complexity and the number of hearings and all the different kinds of things that could come up, we are planning on an engrossment. We plan that there will be some changes, and so we have time for an engrossment in June, in time for adoption by the end of June. So that is the plan there. And next slide is the final slide. Just asking for board feedback and guidance on any of the things that we talked about, and or anything else that you have interested in. So I'll stop there and throw it open.
Commissioners, I said a lot earlier. Does anyone have any comments you'd like to contribute at this point, or questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Yeah, this is a great presentation. It's kind of a refresher, as you've said. You know, we've seen portions of this. I was, I guess, a little surprised at a couple of your open house online results, but I wasn't surprised at the reasons. So when they talk about, let me go back up to that first one. So was on 170 people participated, and that's in the first question. Okay, so it's back on page 15.
Right.
The 59 and 58% kind of surprised me a little bit, and probably as much so as the percentage of people that gave it a 1. And so it was really a bookends response. I mean, 59% obviously is considerably more than 19%, but still that 19% people would think they don't know of anyone that would benefit from this kind of housing. And I think, I don't know, that kind of substantiated. And then we did the same thing on number 2 was much more even. So I guess, do you have concerns? Yes, they expressed concerns. I think it was the same thing as what I felt like when this was first passed. I felt like it wasn't going to be beneficial. I'm not so sure. I haven't heard a percentage that really this is only going to increase housing stock like 3%. Am I remembering the wrong number there?
So the feasibility study found that between just under 1% and 7% of the lots could be feasible for middle housing in the foreseeable future. So it's an incremental, we expect the development to be incremental, but over time that may change. That's kind of a point in time assessment.
Yeah. Seems like fairly low numbers for the amount of work that your department's putting in on the new regulations, but that's okay. And then I get both of the on the 17 slide on page 17, the yes because answers and the no because answers. I get both of those. I think there are some places that it's appropriate, some of the larger lots, but generally those are going to be in your houses that were probably built in the 70s, and certainly not in the houses that have been built since, like, I don't know, 2010 or something like that. It seems like the lots have considerably been smaller and the houses get bigger on some of those regards. So anyway, this has always been an interesting process to me, and I'm not sure I'm convinced it's really going to make a dent in anything, but it is important that we do this because we have to. So we'll see how it works.
Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
You know, Commissioner Willie, I understand what you're saying, but I think what we're looking at here is a philosophy change, and it really is it may not be the perfect fit with the county, as the chair was saying earlier, but it's a fit in different areas, and it does change that mindset about what types of opportunities are there for housing choices. And I think that that's really the main thrust of this.
Commissioner Rogers or Commissioner Fry, do you have anything you'd like to share? And you don't have to.
No, I would say that Jerry probably capsulized some of my concerns at the time. The cities were obviously not happy with parking. They were not happy about potential utility lines that were not sized correctly. But we're beyond all that now. I mean, we have to implement it. It's the law. But I don't see large numbers. But Teresa, good job as usual. We'll go through this process and move forward.
Well, and if I recall, we asked Clean Water Services about size concerns, and they looked at it pretty closely and said there shouldn't be any problem. And I touched bases with PGE as well, and they're like, no, it'll be okay. So, you know what? And given that summary feedback that Teresa reminded me of, I think originally when the bill was first talked about, there was concern that it would make a lot more changes. And this, after all, is allowing, not requiring. So that's pretty good. The last comment I'll make on this slide here, you talked about, does the board have feedback or guidance on, and then the list. There's two things that I was curious about. So I was thinking about this out 30 to 50 years and what might the community look like as a result. And it got me thinking, and I have a map over here on my wall, which is why I kept looking over to it as you were going over different things. And I was looking at the different urban unincorporated areas on the map and wondering, hoping actually, that you all have the opportunity to engage with your colleagues at the city of Tigard, the city of Hillsborough, and the city of Beaverton, particularly, so that the basics that you're working on and the basics that they're working on have some level of similarity, so that at a basic level, all of these neighborhoods, whatever size they may be, of properties that utilize the flexibility enabled by House Bill 2001, that they've all meet that at least minimum. That's all. Because I think there's value and goodness in that, because there will be more homes in neighborhoods in all these communities that we have. Then that was the first question, that's really just somewhat aspirational, not some specific ask. But I also looked at your process timeline, and my fingers are crossed. You have the Board of Commissioners proposed and the Board of Commissioners alternate. And when I looked at the calendar, I tried to think back, okay, what are the months of April, May, and June like for the board? Boy, the end of April, we get both the Clean Water Services and the Washington County proposed budgets to consume. And then in May, we have lots of budget meetings and budget hearings, and we're trying to do an even better job on our community engagement. So May's kind of intense. So the degree to which we can help, when I was trying to figure out, okay, well, planning commissioners are going to get lots of testimony, but I was trying to figure out will we get most of our testimony with the first read or the second? No, the first hearing or the second hearing before, the engrossment or what? And it's been so long. I wasn't coming up with much, so I figured I'd just share what my fuzzy concern might be if I try to put myself in my own shoes coming up in April and May of 2022. So whatever care you can weave into that will be greatly appreciated.
I wanted to comment. We're a little bit back to the ordinance season dilemma that we had before, because suddenly we do have a deadline.
Yeah.
So I just want you to be aware that it's really your decision of what goes in the engrossed ordinance that will happen, in May or early June, which is your decision. After that, for the most part, you're holding the hearings on those ordinances, but you don't have the opportunity to change them again. So I just want you to be aware that, suddenly we have a deadline again. And so we didn't change all the rules in the charter. So it does play out that it's really important when we make that engrossment decision by the board that you're good to go with whatever's in it.
Yeah. And I was wondering if there might be any way for us to, I don't think we can push up the planning commission hearings, but our hope is that they may not need as many hearings because we will have sorted through a number of the topics before we start into the hearing process. But so there may be room there, but I think they also are thinking maybe they will need more hearings. So I think we can look as much as we can to try to make some changes, but unfortunately, with this deadline, it seems to be coming down to this kind of time frame.
So what it sounds to me like, you may have to count on the planning commission alternate plan. But I'm hoping you'll go with the Board of Commissioners proposed timeline, because I think it will be easier on us to be done with our engrossment by May 17th and then finish through the budget the middle of May through the middle of June from there. Also the other thing I was thinking about is we've gotten pretty lucky in the winters of 2020 and 2021. There was one really crummy storm here in February of this year. But in 2019, I remember that winter, we had a whole bunch of different potential snow events, and we canceled a whole bunch of different meetings. And none of that weather really transpired, which was kind of nice. Wasn't as bad as we had prepared for. But this is where I really appreciate the fact that we have virtual and hybrid options. And I'm hoping that that will work to the Planning Commission's advantage for sure. Mm-hmm. As long as people have power, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So great. That's it for me. Any other commissioner thoughts or feedback for our team? We're getting her done. Good job, folks.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Leadership, staff, or commissioners, is there anything more that we need to go over today before we adjourn our work session of Tuesday, September 14th? Nope. Seeing none, we are hereby adjourned. See you next Tuesday. Bye.